Welcome to FedSavvy Strategies Let's GovConsider It, where we explore all things GovCon with industry experts. We're excited to welcome back Dr. Dolores Kuchina-Musina to talk about bid or no bid strategies and how to tell if a contract is the right fit for you.
Let's pick up where we left off, right? So we got maybe left off with a bit of a cliffhanger for people, hopefully a good cliffhanger. We're gonna get a little bit more, I guess, more tactical, right? Get down to brass tacks. Painted a picture last go around in terms of the, I'd say, general environment that people can look forward to, maybe not look forward to, but at least appreciate and understand what they get themselves into. But let's get into more how you get a market, right? And there's not just one path to market. I think it's interesting. I don't know about you, but when I'm dealing with clients, some cases they may be, let's say, new to the market. Many of them are mature to the market, and there's a lot of ways to get there, right? There's a lot of ways to get the end goal, which is some form of business, direct or perhaps indirect, with the U.S. government, and that's, and each has their pros and cons to it. Each has a shorter time span to achieve. Some have a longer time span to achieve. I know you've touched on before, what's your level of urgency, which I think also might have an influence on what path to market you go to. But also, I think it's partly a matter of how mature are you as a business? How mature is your offering as a business also? Not just the maturity of the business itself, but let's say you've got a mature business with a new offering. They're still trying to figure that out, but they may be a mature business, how to operate, how to own, how to run themselves, how to keep themselves out of trouble. But they may have something new to offer that they're trying to figure out, how do I get this to a government buyer? I think at a simple level, you have either a go to direct, a prime contract, or I have an indirect route where I'm a subcontractor, or perhaps I guess you could argue another indirect way is I'm going to go through a reseller. I'm going to sell my product to a reseller, and they're going to do all the stuff for me. I'm going to keep churning out my widgets, and then someone else is going to be the interface. Whereas like a subcontract, I guess what I would typically see experience from where I come from, where you're working for the prime and you have a boutique role on the team, but the path to get to one of those areas, what's the adventure you want to choose? And it may not be exclusive. It's not like you only have to do one. You can play all these different cards as appropriate as you need to. I mean, what are your some? I'd be curious. What are some of your thoughts that determines what path should I choose? Right, there may be a nature of, well, you tell me. What are your thoughts? I've got a few things that I know that I'm thinking about that determine: do I go direct? Do I become a sub? Do I become, maybe go through a reseller partner? What's your take on what's that path to market and how you start that journey to figure out what's the right one to start with?
Yeah. So just, take a step back to where we left it off in the last segment, is having that honest conversation of like, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? And what are you trying to execute? So let's assume in this situation, we're not looking at necessarily like doing your own research or partnering with a university or some of these more of like unique pathways that some people take in the, in the research and development stage, or startups that are creating brand new technology, for example, like in the very infancy stages, because then we'll be here for hours talking about what all the possibilities are. For simplistic ways, let's say they have a prototype, or they have a concept of something tangible that they're trying to bring to the government, or a finished product or service that they're trying to bring to the government. They're like, hey, I'm trying to enter the market. What do I do? Assuming that they really do have a mature product, because sometimes that is a whole other conversation, as you know, that you have to have with people, and they're ready to sell it at scale. That's where you have the conversation of, how are you currently set up? How do you manage your costs? How do you budget? What do you use for accounting? Do you have people on your staff that are familiar with government contracting? The reason why you ask those questions is because you have to understand, where are you baselining everyone in the organization of where you go. If the moment that I start talking to you about, hey, are you doing fixed price or cost reimbursable? Are you trying to do cost incentive type contracts? I've lost you. Like we're talking in two different jargons, two different terminologies. You have to take a step back and you have to do some education along the way. I think the next piece is, once you figure out how they operate, is to really understand how many people do they have to support the work. And these are all of the questions that you will go through as a company when you're making a bid, no bid decision, when you're looking at a government solicitation. So learning to have this kind of decision tree in the beginning is really important, because that also will determine for you, is this work that I can prime or lead myself? Am I set up to do it? Or should I find a subcontractor? Or should I partner with someone and I should be the subcontractor? Companies that have been in this business for 30 years will still ask those three questions to themselves for a bid, no bid decision, because every solicitation is different. There's not going to be a solicitation that's perfectly written for a company, unless it's like sole source or specifically written for that company.
Yeah, they shaped it. They may have shaped it quite well.
Yeah. That explicitly is written where a company can fit all of the capabilities. Now, some can, because they're big enough and they can hire the people. But if you're a small business trying to look into it, you really have to be careful to navigate. Like, do you have a staff of 30 people that can work on this full time? If the answer is no, can you hire those people? Do you need to find a staffing agency where you can have leased labor, or do you need to find a subcontractor? Can you perform the majority of that work? If the answer is no, whether it's by people, whether that's by capabilities or statement of work lines or PWS lines, if the answer is no, you need a subcontractor. And so all of those steps in the very beginning stages of like, hey, am I able to be a prime? If most of those are no, you're probably going to want to partner with someone, especially if it's your first one. And I actually recommend for a lot of people to be a subcontractor first. The reason why isn't because I want them to be tortured by primes. It's because I want them to understand and have some protections of the prime, so that they can see how does it work. And I have been both with numerous companies on the prime side, on the subcontractor side, worked with leased labor. If you have a very good prime, they will support the business, the small business, because they have an incentive to ensure that the work goes smoothly. Okay. Are there bad players? 100%. There's bad people everywhere. But a good prime will take a small business and they will explain to them, how is this going to work? Hey, here's how you do your proposal. Oh, you have questions? What's an indirect rate? Let me explain that to you. That is what the job of the contract administrators, contract managers is. Bids and proposal people should also be familiar with it. So when you're making that decision, what stage are you and how ready are you for that? If you are familiar with how to be a prime from another organization, make sure that you're not taking the assumptions from that organization into the small business that you might be working in, because those systems, those processes might not be as mature as what they were before. Or vice versa, maybe they are more mature. So those three questions really are key. Like, am I set up to be a prime? Number one, am I compliant? Answer no, be a sub or partner, but figure it out. Question two, can I perform the majority of the work? Meaning, do I have the staff? Yes or no? If the answer is no, you know where to move. And the third one is, am I capable? Am I mature enough to perform all of this work myself, or hire people, or have resources to grow in order to fit this work? If the answer is no, then you move on that way. And that decision tree will follow you into 30, 40, 50 years of business during your bid, no bid decisions.
And I think that there's a big point, though, what you hit on, which I think demands to be foot stomped, is that same decision tree someone you just illustrated is going to apply whether you're the largest federal contractor on the planet or you're a one-person shop.
Yep.
The same calculus has to be evaluated. And those guys, the big guys, they do the same thing. They go through, I mean, I've seen no bid decisions from companies who I pegged as a competitor, and I go, could they do it? Yes. There may be other circumstances also dictate not just the resources that they have.
Mhm.
And if you do like your gap analysis of what are my gaps versus the known work, and go, oh, well, most of the gaps are there. I can't handle most of it. You should just bow out and take a sub role or just skip it entirely. Maybe it's not the right adventure for you in the first place. But beyond that decision tree, which I think is completely applicable to every business out there, regardless of size and maturity, is do you understand the nature of how that customer buys? This is
Mhm.
something that I like to look at and evaluate as much as I can. Is when I look and I begin to evaluate how an agency actually does their evaluations, can I get a sense of, are they what I'll call a discount buyer or a value buyer? At large, and it's going to vary from procurement to procurement. But if I've got a discount buyer, I'm competing on price almost every time. And if that doesn't work for my business model, if I don't want to compete on price, or if I can't, then I probably need to skip because it's not alignment of their values and my values. If they want just give me exactly what I asked for, listen, I asked for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Give me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That's all I want. I'm
Yes.
not paying for anything else. And some agencies, that's how they operate. So it becomes very difficult to, if you are not in the business of selling PB&J and you are focused on your, let's say, being ruthlessly efficient versus being, I'd say, I wouldn't say extravagant, but where you offer a lot more features. So I can give you a PB and jelly sandwich with 10 types of jelly to choose from. I can give you this. I want crunchy,
Mhm.
smooth, whatever. If they're a discount buyer and you're a value seller, then you're on the line. You shouldn't even bother. Instead, take a sub role, perhaps, where you become the boutique niche subcontractor to someone bigger, where you can add some value to them, but you can protect how you operate, especially if you can find a prime who's willing to work with you on that case. If it's a value buyer, then you can often command some pricing premiums if you push the right buttons in the evaluation and your solution matches what they're like, no,
Mhm.
wow me. Show me what you got.
Yeah.
I'm actually open-minded on this. If you have a better way of solving my mission that I think is even possible, I will pay more for that. To me, that's a very appealing customer. That they're
Mhm.
not going to just nickel and dime me to death, that they're really going to be listening and looking at the value prop that I have to offer. And you can measure that with some experience with people who know the agency very well or doing your own analysis. We do that kind of thing all the time. And that's an important thing to understand. And I think that part's often overlooked also, or people will lean on, I think, tribal knowledge a bit too much. Well, I heard a guy who said this, who said that. And it was like the Ferris Bueller's episode where there was some girl in his class who was saying that they were trying to track down where Ferris Bueller was. It was this 10-minute dialogue of where he was based on rumor mill. That's not effective. So there's hard analysis that you can and should be doing. But beyond that is also you may one of the points I think you hit on that I think bears in emphasizing is the fact that what I'm offering? How does it align with the overall outsourced spending of that agency, the programs you can define and missions you can really define? If what you offer is so boutique that, and they tend to do these big bundled contracts where it's just one little piece. I mean, they may have a need, they may want it, but the way they buy with these big bundled contracts, I can't pursue that. So let me be happy to be a sub. And that's an important thing to understand. It's an important distinction. I think if you go in this kind of game, you're not going there to sit on the sidelines. Like, give me the ball, coach. I want to get in there. I mean, no one goes into business because you're some shrinking violet sitting by the sideline waiting for someone to call your name. You want to go in
Mhm.
there and get things done and be successful. But honestly, sometimes you need to sit on the sidelines and take a support role, be a second stringer. That's the best you can hope for because
Yep.
it just isn't a good fit for you. But that's an important thing to understand as you go to market. The agency environment may not align with you. The competitive environment may not align with you. If it doesn't, then I'd say don't bother with it, or perhaps just take an opportunistic approach. I'll take a job where I can, but I'm going to focus on agencies that better align with me in terms of how they spend. The programs I can define make sense to fit what I do, and the way that they buy, their values align with mine. That's important. That's no different than a commercial. But that same calculus has to apply to government too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just reminded me there's probably one more litmus test that people need to look at is, can I perform the work in the budget that's allotted or
Yes.
allocated to that work? Because to your point, if they're buying this, at a discounted rate, or if they're used to getting this in 1995 pricing, you as a startup that usually generally has very high overhead rates, you're not going to be able to give, one person for the rate that the government's looking for. So that is a really good reminder. And as you were talking, I was like, dang it, how did I forget that one? But you're absolutely right, right? Like we look at the dollars. A lot of people will see, again, oh my gosh, this is a $2 million contract. I have to bid on it. No, you don't. Let's take a step back. Okay, you want $2 million. Got it. We know what your revenue gap is in order for you to be able to cover your costs and still be profitable. We know what that work is. Let's find you efforts that build up to that work. It's not going to be a one contract deal. And I have seen companies over and over again say, I need a $10 million contract. Do you need 10 million or do you need a $10 million contract? There's a difference between those two. And then also understanding, to your point again, does the customer right? In some instances, $10 million is a small contract for some agencies. For some of them, that's a very large contract. Right. For some agencies. You have to understand that point. You also have to understand not only the money, but who is their contract shop. Not every office or every PEO that you talk to within the government, meaning the programs office or your end user that you're going to talk to, they're not going to have their direct contract person sitting right next to them. It is not how we see, just like most companies that I know of don't have someone that's just a contract manager. They usually are BD and contracts or, contracts and compliance. They're not going to have a contracting officer that they might have directly assigned to them. They may have to go to somebody else that writes that contract. And so they have to be able to have that relationship, or they might not know who that relationship is. So understanding how they buy and how they contract, it kind of goes in together, because you want to make sure they have the money, but two, you really have to know, do they know who their contracting officer is or their contract shop is? If the answer is no to either of those, you need to walk away, because that's going to take you a lot of time to nurture that client. If you have the time, nurture them, because it will pay off in the end. But just know that's not a 6-month thing. That's not a 1-year thing. Those are conversations that they're going to have to have internally. And if someone, has to leave or gets reassigned, you restart that entire conversation again. So understanding how the government works, go back to your civics class, go back to your AP government class. Understanding all of that is going to play a role in you being able to be successful in the government space. And I think as you're looking at, is this worth it? We're not trying to scare you into saying, this is too much. I have to keep track of a lot of things. If you're a business that's wanting to grow, these are not going to be something that is that unique to just government. You have to be able to make those decisions if you're entering a new industry. The world is changing. We're getting more and more global every single day. We've been saying this for like 20 years, but it's still happening. So you have to be aware, and as the businesses are growing, as they're expanding, regulations are too. So commercial companies have to be able to comply with regulations in the EU and the US. I mean, if you're in artificial intelligence, which at this point everybody is, it feels like at least everyone has an AI function somewhere in their app somewhere, or a chat bot. That company that's providing that AI tool to you, if they're providing it to consumers in the EU, they have to comply with those rules. They have to also comply with the US rules. And if they're providing it in another country, they have to comply with that country's rules. So you still have to be aware of regulations. You still have to be aware of compliance. And you still have to be aware of determining what is your value proposition of going to market in that specific state, in that specific country, in that specific industry. And so I want to remind people of that these are all like natural thought processes that you have as a business and as a business owner. There's just those intricacies with the US federal government that you have to keep in mind, that you have to make sure that you're paying attention to at the same time to do business with the government.